Seems like we could be seeing a lot of turbulence in the upcoming few months in the economy, and this is why big banks are now quitting quietly. They're cutting thousands of employees, and more layoffs are coming. But it's not just employees that big banks are throwing away, but also large chunks and very valuable pieces of office space, which they are downgrading and downsizing. And even Wells Fargo, for example, is taking a massive $60-70 million loss just to sell their office in San Francisco, for example. So what is going on here? Well, you do have high interest rates, right? And yes, a lot of traders are considering that interest rates may be getting cut around March or the summer of 2024. But there's also a lot of people who are very skeptical of what the Feds are doing. Some people even say that it could not be no interest rate cut until 2025. Think about that. And no wonder banks are trying to save as much money as possible. Banks are kind of going broke right now, okay? Look at some of the small banking ETFs and the large banking ETFs. It's not really that well. And even though the economy has surprised a lot of forecasters with how strong it is, what about next year, right? What about next year, quarter 3, quarter 4, when rates are still high and companies are going bankrupt? And the next 5 largest US banks cut a combined 20,000 positions so far this year, and we have a few thousand more to come just to top it off for December. A key driving fact for a lot of these cuts is because the finance department is slowing down. The amount of people getting mortgages, for example, is at an all-time low, and it's just like a really scary situation, right? And we have Wall Street. They just don't really like this high interest rate situation. Wall Street is really thinking that high interest rates are here to stay, which is causing a lot of big brokerages, even like TD Bank, to cut about 3,000 jobs. Their profit misses the estimate. They are not making as much money as before. This is straight up 3% of its entire workforce. This is not like a small, firing session. This is like a large chunk. 3% of a company's workforce being completely eliminated is a big deal. And 3,000 jobs are now completely gone. And so far, we're going to be seeing even more loans defaulting. Commercial real estate isn't really doing so well. And also the amount of people opening stores and taking out mortgages and loans is super low. It's as low as 1995, which is something not to be proud of. So TD Bank's excuse was they're doing a massive restructuring plan. But it's not just TD Bank, but Schwab is also closing and downsizing offices in 10 major cities in the US, from San Francisco to San Diego to New York City. They're all cutting a bunch of office spaces. And what's even crazier is Schwab is doing this by the extreme. Schwab is also closing down not just their offices, but they're firing off 2,000 to 3,000 employees, just like TD Bank. Schwab is also saying that they will be able to save $500 million per year from the massive firing spree and the massive, pretty much downsize of offices. And Schwab is saving $500 million. I'm sure TD Bank is saving even more with these job cuts. Obviously, this is not great for people who need jobs or used to have these jobs, but just let you guys know that a lot of these brokerages, these banks, are not as strong and muscular as people think they are. They're actually pretty fragile because now interest rates have been high for the entirety of this year. A lot of these banks and many small companies and corporations cannot take this high interest rate situation any longer. Loans are just filthy expensive. If you want to buy a used house, you're paying almost 7% interest rate, sometimes even higher, which is causing a lot of people to get very, very scared. So I kind of see why TD Bank, Schwab, and several big banks are cutting thousands of positions, and just the top 5 banks combined cuts 20,000 positions. What about the smaller regional banks? They're probably cutting hundreds of workers every single few weeks, and it's absolutely detrimental. And look at this. Working from home is killing offices. Why is construction spending up? This is another thing that a lot of banks are very worried about, simply because there's barely any demand for office space, but people are loaning out money like crazy. According to FDIC, the amount of loans in the commercial sector equates to $3 trillion whopping dollars across every single region of the US. So you have $3 trillion in loans and debts, and many of them are financed by small regional banks. In fact, 30% of all the banks in the US, which is 30% out of 4,000 banks, have extremely high exposure to office real estate loans and debts. And guess what? Vacancies are at an all-time high, but office construction is also at an all-time high, which really doesn't make sense. So let me tell you why this is. Because a lot of big investors are betting big on return to the office. But let's be real, nobody's returning back to the office. Yes, hybrid and return to office is happening, but it's happening at a very, very slow rate. I think a lot of these guys are betting that in the next 5 years, all the online stuff will be gone and everyone's back to the office. But it's a lot more different than that, right? Hybrid work is up. The demand for office space is much lower, with many economists arguing that office space will never be back to what it used to was, and let alone insane amounts of construction. So people thought, this is a good idea. Well, give it a couple years. These buildings don't have tenants. They go default and banks take on the L. And that's what a lot of these, brokerages and big banks are kind of scared of. Commercial office has a huge exposure for a lot of small regional banks. And these are banks and companies which big banks have shares and pretty much authority over. And if these small banks start defaulting, shares go to virtually nothing, basically worthless, like Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic. Stock used to be in the 3 digits and then it become like a penny stock. And of course, these banks are kind of scared, so they're cutting employees, saving money for an economic Armageddon. And check this out. ECB warns banks' commercial real estate hits could worsen stress. European banks are pretty freaked out about this whole commercial real estate situation, especially with Cigna Property Group now defaulting on a series of loans. $5.5 billion, almost 6 billion USD. And it perhaps could be $10-15 billion because now they're trying to auction off a bunch of skyscrapers in the commercial and retail sector. And they're selling for pennies on the dollar right now. So Europe, they're pretty scared about the situation. Now with Cigna defaulting, that is not a great sign at all. And this could be the start of a huge domino effect. And if you look at this, look at this. Europe's Cigna toppled in property rout. And if you look at Rini Benko, the group is also the owner of New York's Chrysler Building, owns 50%, and several high-profile projects and department stores in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And yes, the debts are almost $6 billion, with several small banks and hundreds of creditors on the line. We're going to be seeing some pretty big drama unfolding in the next few weeks with this scenario here. Not to mention the amount of people having jobs is at an all-time low, right? This is a big deal because jobless benefit applications rise. It's at the most in 2 years. There's just not that many jobs anymore. And many of the jobs being cut are all very high income jobs. We're talking about 6-fig jobs or the high 5 figs. So yeah, the economy isn't really doing so great right now. The economy used to be doing pretty good. But now with less and less people having good jobs and less people investing in real estate, and also a bunch of cash is pouring into commercial, this is just something I've never seen before. And this is why a lot of these big banks are cutting jobs, cutting corners, and cutting offices just to save some money. Because 2024, 2025, those are going to be some of the craziest years for money.